Does money make us happier?
So the Latin term for poor is miser, that gives us miserable, and the Romans knew that to be poor sucks. It does, as it turns out, and people can romanticize it, but as Barry will tell you, you need money to be happy. Aristotle recognizes this as well. Happiness is a luxury, right? You only can worry about your happiness when you're taking care of the basics. And yet it turns out that you don't need as much money as you might think to be happy, and there are diminishing returns after about $75,000 a year. Is that the
well, it turns out, yes, the definitive study on that was done by Daniel Kahneman and a colleague named Angus Deaton, who was published in Science about, I don't know, or PNAS about 6 years ago. So if you divide happiness into emotional well-being on the one hand, smiley faces versus frowny faces, and life evaluation on the other hand, what they find is that when it comes to emotional well-being, once you're making $70,000 a year, there's no additional bang for additional bucks.
You're talking about Americans, right?
Americans. But it's a very low number for Americans. I mean, I would certainly have thought that it didn't plateau at 70. I mean, you can barely live in a cardboard box in New York on $70,000 a year, right? But when you're talking about life evaluation, it does not plateau. Then how is my life going overall? Richer is better, and it doesn't seem to flat. I mean, it's got a negative slope. It's not linear, but it doesn't flatten out completely. Now, this is significant because we used to tell the story that money doesn't buy happiness, and that looks like maybe it's not totally true. Money seems to buy happiness, but one possible explanation for this is how do we evaluate how our life is going? Exactly. It seems to me we suffer from a lack of standards for evaluation. So the gold standard, the proxy that helps you answer the question, how is my life going, is how much money am I making? So it may be the reason that it doesn't flatten out is that the only way to know how your life is going is by looking at what your checkbook
And I should just add that's cross-cultural, right? If you look at breakdowns country by country, the wealthier people in the culture tend to be the happiest. And when you look at lists, if you've all seen them, of the happiest countries in the world, they're prosperous first world developed nations, Scandinavia, Canada, United States, etc.
Everyone but France.
Shouldn't really surprise us.
But I think but I think we have to, again, the nuance of what you're saying is so important, because the takeaway is not having more money makes you happy. There's diminishing returns after a certain point, and how your evaluation of what's making you happy is monetarily based at this point in our culture. So that's really, again, back to the cultural issues. That's a cultural issue. It's not. It's how we're framing the question.
Well, I mean, because partly one of the values of success in America in particular is, you're more successful if you make more money, right? So
well, that Webster's definition.
So it's a loop here.
But it's being challenged. So recently there was a challenge, Webster's dictionary, how they define success is being challenged. And it's fortune and fame, and people are saying, no, it's life satisfaction, it's contribution, it's how much time I spend with my family. And actually Barry's recent book, which I read and thought was very good, and love actually, really talks about that, which is, and this is sort of the basis of our research, which is what really brings you satisfaction in your work and what brings you satisfaction in your life. And guess what? It's not really more money. It's, again, making a contribution. And that's having impact, having meaning, ascribing something bigger, and he can speak about it much more eloquently than I can, but the research that we came across, and we focused mostly on women, although we interviewed over 70 male and women leaders, and what we found is that women tend to want purpose in their work, but it's not just women. Millennials, 60% of them surveyed said that they want their work to have purpose and impact, and they're not going to take a job that doesn't have impact. So our
do that. I just want to jump in here. Are you suggesting that maybe purpose is, that we're generalizing wildly here, but is more important for women than men?
Well, between the ages of 35 and 55, the research basically shows that women want purpose in their work. I think 90% of Americans, and I'm going to turn to Barry in a minute, but in this energy project, that was 90% of Americans felt disengaged from their work, right? And 60% of millennials, men and women, so it's not just women, it's men and women, want purpose in their work. So it could be also, again, how we're defining success, but it looks as though women, when they get to the higher ranks within companies, and Sheryl Sandberg put out a great study last week with McKinsey that's talking about this 16% stall that women are at. So we know that across the world, women are basically stalled at 16% leadership. We're 50% of the population. We graduate more from college. We graduate more graduate degrees. We're 50% in all management jobs at this point, except the very top. Some call it a glass ceiling. Others call it a thick layer of men. But anyway, there's 16%. But there is this 16% issue, right? So why do we have this 16% issue? And what Cheryl came out with last week was that actually women are not that happy when they get there. And what we're finding, and what we really feel, is that if women can use their power for purpose, they're getting more job satisfaction. But I really feel that in the presence of Barry, his recent book about why we work is a really interesting contribution to this topic.
Well, you're very kind, but
I'm
but I can't speak to whether there's I certainly don't know whether there's a gender difference, and I can't speak to whether there's a generational difference. My impression is that at least for now, millennials will not tolerate work that's pointless, even if they are well paid to do it. So if you want to hire talented millennials, you're going to have to find a way of making the work they do important. Or pointing out, if it actually is important, taking pains to point out why it's important and how it's important, because these people want to have an impact in the world, and they seem willing, as long as mom and dad are going to pay their college loans off, they seem willing to sacrifice material success for sort of the psychological and moral success that comes with knowing the world is a better place because of something that I did yesterday. Whether this will last as they accumulate the responsibilities of middle age, like mortgages and kids, remains to be seen. But at least at the moment, they won't settle for the things their parents were more than happy to settle for. And I think that bodes very well for the collective well-being of the generation as it moves into middle age. If they hang on to this value, they will be happier people than their parents.